I'm Greg Cunnif. I've got a couple hats on today. I'm here representing the Hydronics Industry Alliance, HIA-C for short. We're part of RPA, Radiant Professionals Alliance. My day job is with AHR. We're consulting engineers principally in the geothermal business. So we're here today to talk about a couple different things. One of them is our software called BEST. Has anybody used BEST before? A few of you. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to show you a little bit more about what's going on with BEST. And then we're also going to talk about a concept which is heat recovery. We call it net the energy. So we can share heat and energy between buildings and within a building. Okay? So BEST is our building efficiency system tool. We've been at this for 20 years, I would say, something like that. And we've made a number of improvements to it. And we'll show you how we can use the software to model what we're talking about today, which is heat recovery and net the energy. A developing trend, if you will, we're calling it thermal energy networks. And we can share energy amongst buildings in a community through a thermal energy network. Here we're showing piping in the ground that's basically looping the city, and then we're taking heat off that pipe. We're putting heat back into that pipe depending upon whether we need to heat or cool in each building. So we're sharing the energy from building to building. How do we do that? Well, we're going to use heat pumps. We're going to use something called a single pipe, which is up here in the upper right-hand corner. Anybody familiar with single pipes? A few. All right, we'll talk about that. That's important that it's a single pipe because what we're trying to do here is allow the building owner, homeowner, whatever, an opportunity to take heat off of or put heat back into that line, just like you would natural gas, right? And if we had a two-pipe system that required balancing and every time we added a building onto it, we'd have to go in there and rebalance the system. That's not too good. So a single pipe, its biggest advantage is its self-balancing. I can add any number of units wherever I want at the beginning or end of the loop, and everybody's just happy. Here on the left, you can see different sources of thermal energy. Upper left, you can do actually a closed-loop system. You can do surface water. We can do waste treatment, or we can do wastewater energy recovery, a number of different sources that could be available in that city. And we're going to run that through our single pipe, and then we're going to dump that into the buildings. That single pipe is called several different things. You may have heard these descriptions. Thermal energy network is the latest and greatest, a 10. Sometimes it's called an ambient temperature loop, ATL. How many have heard of ATLs? Okay. Or it's even called fifth generation district heating and cooling. That's advancing from steam systems years ago. Fifth generation is now our single pipe, and we're taking heat on and off of that loop as we run around the building. So it's got different names, but it's all the same thing. All right, single pipe. Who's familiar with single pipe? Few of you. Ooh, okay, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time then. The biggest advantage to it is down here in the right-hand corner. There's no balancing valves. What it is a single pipe. Every terminal unit is a decoupled secondary piping circuit. So that means that the flow in the primary does not affect the flow in the secondaries, and the flow in the secondaries does not affect the flow in the primaries. Therefore, I can add and subtract those terminal units whenever I want, and I don't have to rebalance the main system. That make sense? That's the biggest advantage to the single pipe and why it's being used in thermal energy networks. Okay, here's a couple examples. Some of them you might be familiar with. There's a public housing development in New York City. It's a couple blocks from Penn Central, and it's called Penn South. There are 10 20-story buildings. Surrounding that are other facilities. Right up here, that's a post office. And what's interesting about that is that facility has cooling needs all year long, just because of all the heat that's generated in the building. And if we could just move that right across the street, we can supply heat to these 10, 20-story buildings. That's kind of cool, huh? Yeah. And that's not a whole, we're not piping this clear across town. We're just going under the street. Yeah, that's pretty slick. Here's what it looks like. See those blue lines? That's the thermal energy network that runs around the neighborhood. And then you just take a little offtake here and run up to the post office, grab some of that heat, and then we can distribute it around that thermal energy network. Pretty simple stuff. This is what it looks like just in a flow diagram. The outside is the single pipe all the way around the outside. Upper left here, we're showing the Penn South. This is a consolidated load. Post office at the bottom, right in the center. Where's my buddy? Here, Mr. Albertson. That's one of your wastewater energy recovery systems that you could take from the Penn South towers themselves. You could move that heat wherever you wanted. Okay, here's another project. This is for a public utility in the southeast. What's interesting about this one is it's a mixed-use facility. Here you can see we've got the residential housing. We've got commercial development, retail, offices. And so in this particular thermal energy network, you've got excess heat being generated by the commercial facilities that we can utilize in the residential facilities. This is what this one could look like. The black are the thermal energy network piping, picking up heat and moving it around this thermal energy network. What was really interesting is not worrying about recovering heat, but just the diversity in the load on the cooling side, because we've got mixed use, residential, commercial, right? If you took the sum of the peaks of the cooling load, we're almost 9,000 tons up here. But because we have a lot of buildings on the network and they all have different occupancies, the diversified cooling load is just a little over 6,000 tons. So that's a huge reduction in what we need to go find for a place to dump the heat off. And that's just because there's so many different kinds of buildings on the thermal energy network. Here's another one. This was also in New York City. It's called Amalgamated Housing, another public housing project. There were two 20-story buildings in this particular project. And NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Administration, wanted to use this project as a demonstration of wastewater energy transfer, WET. So what we have looked at and are proposing is a shark system where we're recovering heat from the wastewater. Very simply, you run the wastewater into a grinder. That then goes into a heat exchanger, and we preheat the domestic water as it's coming in, and we recover a substantial amount of heat. And in this particular case, NYSERDA has actually funded the project, so we're proceeding on the design of that. Pretty slick. Okay, so this is what it would look like here. So this is a plot of the heating and the cooling load. This orange bar here, that's the wastewater, that's the potential of wastewater energy. Down below here you can see if we put in that system, we're going to cut the domestic water load about in half. So that's a substantial number over the entire year here. Okay? This wasn't necessarily part of the wastewater study, but one of the things that drove both projects in New York was electrification. So we looked at what might happen here, and we looked at different kinds of electrification. Rubber meets the road. What we were looking at here is different kinds of HVAC systems that could be all electric. The top 1, 2, 3 are some kind of air source systems. The one here at the top is an air-to-water heat pump. Then we've got a water-to-air heat pump distributed, but with an air-to-water auxiliary. Instead of using gas boilers, we're going to use an air source heat pump. But then in northern climates, that guy's not going to work when it gets cold, so we're going to go to an electric boiler, or we have just a straight air-to-air heat pump. This is the number over here that you need to worry about. It was on the right-hand side. So for that utility company, which was Con Edison, if you went to fully electrified using air source heat pumps, you can see that they're going to up the demand on their system over 30 megawatts. That's a big number, right? So if we did it with our thermal energy network and using ground source, geothermal, we only increased the load by 9 megawatts. And that's basically the pumping energy to pump that water around the thermal energy network. Okay? That's a big difference in going fully electrified. Air source heat pumps in northern climates, yes, you can fully electrify, but the problem with them is that when it gets cold, not only do they lose poop, but at around 0 to 10 degrees, they just shut off. You can't keep them lubricated, and you can't keep them running. So to protect themselves, they just shut up. So you have to go to some kind of backup electric heat. Whereas with geothermal, we don't need a backup. It can run all year long, and as you can see here, there's very little increase in demand by doing that. Okay, now let's talk about individual buildings and how we can move heat around in individual buildings. This is just an example here of the amount of heat that we might be able to recover from the cooling system and put that into the heating system. Here's an air-to-water system and how you could do that. So in the lower right-hand corner is an air-to-water heat pump. We have 2 tanks here, one full of hot water, one full of cold water. This guy here is a single function. It can only heat or cool. So what happens is it flips back and forth between heating and cooling to keep the tanks full of hot water and cold water. Okay. So what are we going to do when it gets cold and it shuts off? Ooh, that's not good, right? So we got a backup boiler over here on the left because that heat pump's not going to give you anything when it gets below 0. The other thing that happens with an air, or actually with any heat pump, is the lift from the temperature of the source or sink to what it is we're trying to heat. That lift with conventional refrigerants is about 100 degrees. So if it's 10 degrees outside, we're only getting 110 degrees off that air-to-water heat pump. That's not enough to heat the building. So we've got a little booster in here, right here, this booster heat pump, so it pumps the heat from a low temperature up to a high temperature, and we can heat the building. Ah, great. Interestingly enough, though, when we're cooling the building, this chill water is coming off at about 55 degrees. What if we ran that into the booster and recovered all that waste heat? So this little guy does 2 things. It boosts the temperature in the winter to give us good temperatures for heating, and in the summer we can recover it. So that's a full heat recovery system in terms of reusing the wasted heat in just the space heating system. Okay? All right, here's the same thing, but we're going to use a geothermal source in the lower right-hand corner. There we don't need the booster because we're going to get adequate temperatures out of that geothermal heat pump. The industry talks about low temperature heat, okay? That those heat pumps, the geothermal, they still have about 100 degree lift. So if you got 40 degree water, you only get 140. However, our friends, the Europeans, are now offering water to water heat pumps. You ready for this? What's their high limit? Anybody know? Huh? 240. There's one out on the floor. They can go to 240 now in one lift. Yeah. That's a huge deal. So when we're talking about retrofitting existing buildings that have hydronic heating systems in it that were designed for 180, we don't need to go in and rip anything out. We just need a heat pump that can produce 180. And actually those buildings, if you were to operate them, they probably only need 150, 160, even in a design day. Having been in the engineering business all my life, you don't want a phone call when it's 40 below 0 and the building's not heating, so you always have some extra poop in there. And these systems can operate much less than 180 degrees. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to point out is in the upper right-hand corner here, we have to sell this job. I mean, this is all great stuff, but if we can't sell the job, it's all irrelevant. So we in the hydronic industry, even though we have the best, most comfortable, most efficient system, we're also the highest cost. You can't get something for nothing, right? The first law is still the first law. So how do we compete with the air source and refrigerant guys? Well, one of the things that we can do is reduce the number of pipes in the building. So in the upper right-hand corner, you're just going to see 2 pipes. Whoa, that's pretty slick, huh? We'll talk about single pipe technology. and we'll talk about integrated piping systems and how we can reduce the number of pipes and therefore reduce the cost. Okay, anybody familiar with either single pipes or integrated piping systems? A little bit, huh? Okay, a single pipe we just talked about. Anybody have an idea what an integrated piping system is? It's a piping system where we're going to do double duty with some other piping system in the building for HVAC. What other piping systems do we have in a building? Potable water. Yeah, right. Okay. So let's take this as your classic 4-pipe fan coil on the right, and on the left are 3 pipes for the domestic water. You have chill water, you have cold water, hot water, and a return. Oh, nice system, but it's expensive. Okay? So, what if I did an integrated piping system? Here I'm going to use the domestic hot water pipe as 2 pipes in that 4-pipe. On the left, we're going to use the hot and cold water pipes as the supply mains for that 4-pipe fan coil, and then we're going to have a 2-pipe return. So I went from 7 to 4. That's pretty cool, huh? You like that? All right. Now, what if we did a single pipe? Here on the right are just 2 single pipes for the fan coils, and on the left are the 2 domestic water. So I still went from 7 to 4, right? There's 4 pipes, and there's 4 pipes. What happens if I combine the 2 of them? What do I got? Huh? 2 pipes. Oh, this is pretty cool. I went from that to that. Whoa, that's a huge savings. You know, that's like 20% off the first cost of the systems. Now we're starting to be competitive with those air side and refrigerant guys. So that's what we were showing here in the upper right-hand corner. That's a single pipe, but it's also an integrated piping system. And this is for fan coils. Huh? What do you think? Interesting? There are jobs out there being constructed right now. Okay. Now let's look at heat pumps rather than fan coils. So here's a heat pump, classic boiler tower, right? In here we're going to recover heat. Just inherently, these heat pumps can either add heat into or take heat out of the loop. So if we have some interior zones that need cooling, fine. But we're also showing now here how we can recover heat to heat the domestic water down here in the lower right. So we got a heat exchanger, booster heat pump, and now we can recover heat from the HVAC system to heat the domestic water. But we're still using your classic boiler tower up here, and when it gets cold, we need the backup boiler because there's not going to be enough heat generated in the building to heat the exterior, right? Okay. So far, so good. And here's what we would do if we did it with geothermal. We're going to replace these guys here, the cooling tower, the boiler, and that air source heat pump with a single geothermal. And we're going to do heat recovery. Pretty cool, huh? Now, I'm going to throw another curveball. Could I use a single pipe system here? Huh? Wow. Integrated piping. What's the other piping system that exists in the building? Fire protection. What if I use the fire sprinkler line as the line to circulate the condenser water around the building? Could I do that? Anybody ever done it? No? I don't know. I've done a bunch of these. It's been in the NFPA, Chapter 13, I don't remember the paragraph number, since the late 1970s. Where's Mr. Ricky? Hi there. He worked for the company that patented this system. It was called Tri-Water, American Air Filter. So that system's been around a long time, and here we've gone from 2 to just 1 pipe, but that pipe isn't even the HVAC pipe. It's courtesy of the fire sprinkler system. All right? So it's, you could think of it as a 3-pipe because you got 2 for the domestic water, and I got 1 pipe for the fire sprinkler combination HVAC. Now we're starting to be able to compete, and we can do some pretty cute things with energy recovery. Now let's talk about BEST. How could I model what's going on in these systems and be able to show this to a building owner that this is a better system than that VRF system or DX system he was going to put in the building? So we're going to use our software. This is the BEST software. building efficiency system tool. So I took those 4 systems that we just were looking at, and I modeled them in BEST. Upper left-hand corner is the projected energy consumption annually, and then the upper right-hand corner is the efficiency of the systems, the COP of the system, not the equipment. It's the COP of the system, and obviously the geothermal components, even though these other 2 had heat recovery, the geothermal are going to be more efficient, right? So we're able to model those 4 systems with just this single piece of software. It's pretty slick. Here's what it looks like if you put everything together and you start comparing those 4 systems against regular systems. I'm going to call it normal systems here without heat recovery. Here's a heat pump, boiler tower, a VAV, VRF, and DX splits. That's the guys on the right. These guys here, the kind of orange colored, are systems that we just talked about that have heat recovery. To give you an idea, here's a heat pump, boiler tower with heat recovery. Here's a heat pump, boiler tower without heat recovery. So the heat recovery is worth, I don't know, what do you think that is? Maybe 15% of the total energy consumption. We can reduce your energy consumption by about 15% by reusing the heat in the building. And again, we model all that with this software here. Okay, building efficiency system tool, just a little bit more information on that. Again, here's what it looks like output-wise. Upper left shows you the energy consumption. Upper right shows you the efficiency of the systems. We also have some tabs up for you here. Life cycle cost, we can do a complete life cycle cost for you. So you can actually compare first costs as well as operating costs to show your customers what's the best system. That includes first cost as well as operating costs. Okay? So again, we can do energy and operating costs. We can do life cycle cost. And you get to pick. We have over 1,000 locations for the weather data, NOAA weather data from North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico. The best part of this is in the lower left, it's free. Just go on to our HIA website and download this thing for free. One of the problems we have in our hydronic world is we're trying to convince people to spend more money on an HVAC system, and you need to do that when the budgets are being put together. And there is other software out there that'll do that. Anybody familiar with Train Trace, Carrier HAP, HAP, the hourly analysis program? They're all good programs, but it takes a lot of time. It might take you a week to be able to model 4 or 5 different systems on this building, and then you can present that to your customer. Well, what we want to do is be able to do that up front at very little cost. So when you sit down with that customer, then you can say, here's what we expect the systems to do, and then you can make some fairly intelligent decisions. And again, it's free. Okay, we're storing the water at 130 degrees. Legionella, you kill it at about 124. So we're storing the water at 130 degrees to kill the Legionella, and then we pump that out through the building. And what is that in your opinion? 140? Then we'll store it at 140. We don't care. We've been doing 130 systems for quite some time and have had no problems. But if you want to store it at 140, store it at 140. And those heat pumps can do that easily, right? Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, good question. Oh, yes. Okay, the question was, with this system, it appears we don't have a domestic return, domestic hot water return, right? Okay, so here's your system. There's the domestic hot water return, right? Correct. All right. Yeah, really good. What do we have here? This is the single pipe. It doesn't stop. There's your return line. You have to have the return line to satisfy the HVAC system, so you get it automatically. That's correct. Exactly. Every one of these components has to be listed for potable water, including the coil in that fan coil unit. That's correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. And there are manufacturers out there that can do that. Once every 24 hours, whether or not it's a heating or cooling coil, and whether or not you've had a heating or cooling demand, that circulator kicks on and pumps water through that coil for a minute. And we flush it out. Exactly, yeah. Okay, question is, the fire sprinkler system has to be tested annually, right? We don't have any leaks. We're going to do that, all right? Excuse me. So you're going to have to shut that HVAC system down for a short time while you do your test. Okay? Yeah. It's not going to take very long to do that test. Yeah. The bypass is there for, how do I say this? In NFPA 13, you cannot have any fire service water going through a piece of mechanical equipment, so that's a bypass. All right? So we don't go through any of the mechanical equipment if we have fire flows. Yeah, great question. Yep. One of the things that Rick and I did when we were selling this system, anybody ever heard of MIC? MIC? Nobody's heard of MIC? Ooh. Microbiological induced corrosion is literally bugs that eat metal. So if you have a pipe, right, and we get something that precipitates out of the pipe and ends up on the bottom, it's not uniform. There's a covered piece of pipe and an uncovered piece of pipe. Well, you can also get bacteria in the pipe, and it doesn't cover the whole pipe. You got a piece that's covered and a piece that's uncovered. In the presence of oxygen, you create a galvanic cell, and the piece of pipe under whatever's covering it becomes the anode, and it's going to develop a leak. There are examples of fire sprinkler systems that use Schedule 10 pipe. Within a couple, 3 years, they developed MIC, pinhole leaks, and they had to replace the piping in the whole system. So when I used to do this, I'd go around to the fire marshals and I said, "You have a problem with MIC?" "Oh, yeah. I said, "What if I could completely cure your problem with MIC? Would you be interested in talking to me?" "Yeah, I would." I said, "Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to circulate the water in your sprinkler system. It's not going to be dead water. And we're going to put an air separator in there to remove the oxygen. So you're not going to have a problem with corrosion in your pipe any longer. We're going to make your fire sprinkler system work better if you let us hook it up to an HVAC system." I live in Montana. I made a trip around to all the major cities, and I stopped in Helena and saw the state fire marshal, and they all signed off. Yeah, it's a great idea. Okay, we're talking the fire sprinkler?
Yeah, the fire sprinkler system.
Okay.
Independent heads are technically dead then.
Yes, but that's not domestic water. Okay. We're not using the water in the fire sprinkler system for domestic water. We don't care anything about Legionella in that enclosed system. It's just a normal hydronic system, right? If you're doing this system, then you need to worry about it, right? That's domestic water, and I need to worry about Legionella. Okay, yeah, and dead legs. That's an interesting thing about dead legs. If you read the new AHR, help me here, what's the new 125? What is it? I don't know. It talks about domestic water and Legionella, and one of the things it talks about are dead legs, right? Well, we were just talking about that. We got a dead leg, but we're going to circulate that water once a day. If you got a domestic water system with a dead leg that runs out to a fixture and it's not used because somebody's on vacation or they've left for the weekend, that's a dead leg. There's no way to get that. But here, we're always going to circulate the water, so we never have a dead leg. Yeah, it's actually, again, this is going to make your system work better. Right, just like the fire sprinkler system. When I was talking to the fire marshal, I said, if you let us hook up HVAC, we're going to make your system more reliable. How do you convince them to, yeah, you have to convince them to buy in, right, okay? So we showed them what they could save if they hooked up to it, right? Rick was talking about yesterday. In this particular case, Penn South would pay for the piping, right? So they, in effect, become the owner, but the post office across the street, they could see, oh, yeah, if I hook up to this, I can turn off my cooling towers. Whew. And they're using a lot of water all year long. In fact, this building here, you can see steam coming off these cooling towers right now, right? And yet we need to heat that corridor out there. That's kind of dumb, but that's just the way we design systems. A 4-pipe fan coil system or a 4-pipe air handling system, you don't mix the two of them, but Here we're going to mix the two of them. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. That was our hardest part, was convincing everybody to buy into it. What did it take us, Jay? I don't know, months and months of discussions to do that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Greg is exactly right. I know that I was one of the people, and we had scientists and engineers, took several trips to the site, and NYSERDA wouldn't fund it until we got a letter not only from the post office but from Con Ed that they would actually run the pipes under the ground. And they bought into it. Both of them had to give letters of support. And the interesting thing is the UA, the Pipe Fitters Union, got involved, and shortly thereafter the state passed the Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, which not only allowed energy companies to start piping energy from buildings cooling and vice versa to other buildings across property lines, it basically turned it into an energy company, an energy company right away to put in these thermal energy networks. So the real point is, in the United States right now, there are 3 states that have already passed thermal energy networks laws, and another 12 to 14 in the works right now. This is exploded like wildfire. Wouldn't you call it, Greg, like the last great frontier of energy distribution, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
It's the wild, wild west.
A lot of work, though, wasn't it?
Some cons. Ooh. Well, for just a thermal energy network in a city, we just discussed that. You got to get everybody to buy in, right? That's the most difficult part of it. Okay. Technically, it's pipe in the ground, so you need to have a good contractor. It's no different than burying gas piping in the ground, right? Only in today's world, we're not using steel that eventually leaks. We're using plastic. But you need to have a competent contractor, right? And you also, in places like New York, you're going to have to go through a number of approvals from different agencies. So how do I say that? The cons would be the soft side of the construction, right? Dealing with potential people that want to hook up, dealing with the regulatory agencies. It's not a technical problem. That's been, I mean, it's we've been burying pipe in the ground for years and years, right? And we run water through them, and we run gas, and we run all sorts of stuff through them. So it's not the technical part that's a con, it's the soft side of it. Yeah. Is that a fair statement, Jay? Yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah. Having been a contractor, that was, I know that. I did contracting in California, and getting a building permit was incredible. I'd go over to the building, the building inspector, and I'd walk in the door, and I'd get down on my knees, and I'd say, please. It was pretty close to that. All right. Other questions here? These are good. Did we convince the 2 gentlemen here that integrated piping systems are okay? Or have we still got some... You're still a little, okay, all right. I can tell you there's hundreds of these integrated piping systems installed. Hundreds of them. I've probably done 25 of them myself in my career. I live in Montana. We started all this up in Canada and northern Montana, believe it or not. Montana Power Company funded us to do the research back in the 1980s. Yeah, so, and we just took that to the rest of the world. Yeah. Yes. A list? Oh, you want a list of the integrated piping systems? Oh, yes, sure. I can give you a list. Just, yes, I can tell you where they are. Yep. Like I say, they started up in the northern tier, but now they're in all sorts of places. Just fired off one in Salt Lake, Pendry Towers, just up there by the ski hill. Yeah, we did that about, I don't know, fired it off maybe 6-9 months ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're on short buildings and tall buildings. Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess you're going to find out you got a leak real quick, like, aren't you? before it does up, $50,000 worth of damage to your building. Somebody's going to say, I can't flush my toilet. And they're going to go, oh, okay, let's go find what's going on. Yeah. It's no different than any other system, right? If a leak's going to develop in a domestic water, it doesn't make any difference that it's also feeding the fan coils. It's irrelevant. The water's going to come out of the leak, right? Here's a good question, though. How many pipes do I have now? 2. How many did I start with? 7. So I got fewer pipes that are going to leak. I've made the system more reliable, not less reliable. Every time I've looked at one of these systems, I can tell you why they're more reliable. We get rid of the MIC and fire sprinkler systems, right? We don't have dead legs running out to our fan coil for Legionella. Yeah, we make the system work better when you combine the two of them. Does that sound like a salesman, Rick? Does that still sound like a salesman? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Rochester is embarking on a decarbonization effort, and they're looking at the downtown area, and they want to put in thermal energy networks through the whole downtown area, and then have a number of, obviously, customers hook up to it. Some of them are public. They're city buildings, Mayo Clinic. Developers are coming in. There's a $6 billion expansion, if I remember correctly, from Mayo. $5 billion, yeah. And in fact, Mayo just started drilling open loop wells for their own thermal energy network just within their complex. It's not going to be hooked up to the city. It's just their own. So they're embarking on quite a project. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. In fact, we've got that Geothermal Rising conference coming up in Rochester in March for anybody that would like to go. Yeah, it'll be really interesting. Yeah. 4 more minutes. Anybody else have any questions? Are we satisfied over here that single pipe and integrated piping are okay? All right. Our gentleman back here is still wiggling his hand a little bit, but yeah. The big thing is we're now making hydronics competitive. We've never been competitive with air systems, and particularly the refrigerant systems, the VRF guys, the DX splits, right? What I can tell you now is that we are going to be competitive with everything but crappy PTACs. You're never going to get down to the cost of a PTAC through the wall system with hydronics, but we can get there with every other system, including DX splits. The higher the building, we're better off. We looked at a building it's actually here in Chicago. It was 14 stories, and they were going to put DX splits, so you had a forest of condensing units on the roof with refrigerant lines run up and down 14 floors. That's a lot of refrigerant piping. So when we did the layout for the single pipe system, the contractor came back and said, I can save $1 million in refrigerant pipe. Whoa. Whew. That was kind of a no-brainer. Yeah. There's a lot of, it's a lot of pipe when you're running it 14 floors back and forth, right? And we're just running a single pipe around each floor that was already there. It was this domestic water line that we didn't have to add. All right. I believe you. All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.